What is up, friends? I just posted a couple hours ago a brief video about my reflections on a walk I went on recently. A recent walk when I was swinging my arms and swinging my legs and walking like a human being is designed, as opposed to the sort of enfeebled amble and meander that I tend to do with my senior canine, who, bless him, can't move much faster than that, but it's not really great for my body. I need to go out on my own walks to do the dynamic human movement that I was designed for and to put into practice some of the beautiful conditioning elements of the human walking gait. Swinging my arms, stretching my fascia, spinal mobilization, hip mobilization. It's a beautiful thing. I shared that video with a triathlete friend, and I was explaining to him the inspiration for that video, and the things that have me thinking about my own thoracic mobility and my shoulder, the relationship between my shoulder action and stabilization, torque generation, horizontal force production in my walking and running gait. And as I was telling him about it, I was like, I should just tell the world, because maybe one other person will benefit because you want to know. So here's where this comes from for what it's worth. And this video is going to lead me to a number of other topics that I'm going to put aside, which breaks my soul a little bit, but because I need my videos to not be about everything all at once, all the time. Okay, so we're going to piece by piece. So why was I sharing this with my triathlete friend? Because this video is a big deal for anyone who's doing running. It's a big deal for everybody, but runners tend to care more because they're obsessed with their running. So I hope you're obsessed with just walking and running, not because you have a number on your chest, but because you want to do it well for your body. That's the situation I'm in. So I was telling the runner friend, or the triathlete friend, that I want him to pay more attention to his scapular stability and his breathing for the reasons I describe in the video. So let's break those down. Number one, your upper body is a little bit underappreciated in terms of its role in your gait, running or walking. But the way you move your arms absolutely affects and is affected by, it's a circular loop, but it impacts powerfully how your lower body functions. And lower body in this case is like, core, so not even that low, right? Spine, hips, so pelvis, actual hips where your femur is attached, and all the way down to your feet. There's this engine. It's even there. Check out spinal engine theory, right? There's this engine effect, this torque generating effect. You know this is real, because if you try to sprint without moving your arms, you cannot go as fast as if you're using them, right? And vice versa, if you try to sprint with just your arms right here, you can feel the resistance that you're generating in your center that you have to contain with your own anti-rotational abdominal strength, which is actually, if you were trying to move, would be the force that you're using to move. So here, if I just want to not move my feet and move my arms, I have to contain it. That same energy I can contain is my torque power potential that I'm going to leverage to run or walk forward if I were moving my feet. Okay. So in that little video, I talked about breath, shoulder stabilization, and arm movement and thoracic mobility. Lots of little topics. Number one, why was I thinking of these things? Because this is not something I do particularly well. I work on my shoulder stabilization, the activation of mostly my serratus anterior. Look up this muscle. You need a visual. It is a gorgeous piece of anatomical art in terms of its attachment to the underside of your shoulder blade and ribs 1 through 9. It has a huge footprint on your rib cage, and that footprint is because it is responsible, largely oversimplifying, but it is largely responsible for creating a strong, stable adherence of your shoulder blade to your rib cage. That trajectory that your shoulder blade is looking for is for doing things with your arm, right? If you have pain in your shoulder, when you lift heavy things or you push something overhead, etc., that in part is because your shoulder blade isn't moving well to support this joint. But in the gait cycle, it is how you are creating the torque force through this engineering of your upper limb. Okay? Because if you can move your arms, you can flap here and not create any force. You're going to create more force when you have good scapular adhesion to your rib cage, so your scapula moves your rib cage and it moves your spine. right? Your abs are, your abdominal muscles are attached to your rib cage. You're getting this beautiful cross-body tensioning and action that's creating that force. I have the emojis all floating through my eyes because it's so beautiful. It's such an incredibly elegant but intricate design. It's just we have to show some appreciation. Breath. The breath piece that I mentioned might be more subtle, but it's super powerful. Actually, I'm going to flag Mobility Maker. She is a trainer, I believe, for the Blue Jays. She's a trainer for professional baseball teams in the United States. She's worked with a lot of other professional sports. After I made my video, my little 3-minute rant about my shoulder blades, I saw her post and I was like, I need to put this into the world because I'm onto something with my self-exploration. And here she is validating the importance of breath in the shoulder movement. So here I will link that in, it's an Instagram post. I will link it in the comments or, in the description. So what is the breathing piece? The breathing piece is that your rib cage is making the glide path for your shoulder blade because it's what your serratus is attached to. And your shoulder blade has a gentle concavity to its shape, right? So this is an approximation of my shoulder blade. My rib cage, in an ideal world, is going to be somewhat symmetrical to that shape so that my shoulder blade moves well along it. Anytime my shoulder blade is gaping from my rib cage, there's a dysfunction that I'm inviting, right? It's either not supporting my arm very well or it's not moving my ribs meaningfully, with as much pressure. It's like if your tires are or aren't inflated on the ground, like how much rubber is contacting how much traction. Like this is just basic concepts, right? So applied to the body. So your rib cage shape is adjusted by the way you breathe. Your ribs are not a solid, rigid cage, right? They are the shape of a cage in some ways, but they move in all kinds of dynamic ways. They move relative to each other. If you do a side reach, for example, this side of your rib cage is expanding like an accordion. This side has to close a little bit along with the spinal lateral flexion. Your ribs have a independent rotational capacity. They move differently even rib to rib. So my bottommost ribs, 7 through 10, are responsible, or they're attaching to my diaphragm. And as I breathe, they have what's called bucket handle breath pattern, right? They breathe out to the sides. Bucket handle breathing is a subject. Look up that term. I didn't make that up. That is a term of art used to describe respiration. So the arms, this is my arms imitating that bucket handle movement. That's what it's referring to, that the ribs move up and out versus ribs, like the uppermost ribs of the chest, they move more like, this has a term as well. It's like pump handle, I think is what they use, because it moves up and down, whereas these move out. So knowing how your ribs move and maximizing the mobility and the shaping of your ribs, right? It's almost like you don't want them to be deflated and pulling away from your scapula. So the lower ribs and the ribs to the backside and where your serratus is really getting some good traction here, that bucket handle breathing, making sure you don't have dents and divots in the glide path for the scapula because you're breathing and expanding optimally is a big deal, impacting the action of the shoulder blade for the force production. Now, I learned about the asymmetry between my shoulder blade on my left and my right side having their relative level of adherence and activation capacity from doing loaded movements, kettlebell movements, some ground-based, floor loaded movements when I had weight on my hands. And I learned that I had sort of a no man's land behind some parts of my shoulder blade on my left. My shoulder action would have passed basically any movement screen, I'm pretty convinced, but I could feel a difference and I want a higher level for my body. But even I could detect it, which means if you have dysfunction, you can probably learn to detect it too, whether it's a massive impact on the way you move or a minimal. For me, it's a big enough deal. I'm working on it. I actively work on it. So, two things. How do I work on it and how did I find out? Or what I think caused it. So the cause, because I also want to, in working on it, I don't want to take steps forward to work on it and continue to undermine it. The cause, I believe, is from sleeping on my left side. I have had all kinds of issues in this shoulder being less comfortable in certain ways, right? Less actual, like this used to be very painful for me before I started doing some shoulder PT. And so now my shoulder would pass a movement screen to qualify. Now it would pass. So what does sleeping on that side do to that shoulder? Well, I don't sleep like this. I would sleep with my arm here. So the pressure of my body would be pushing those muscles into this distended position forward, which by the way is kind of like part of the running gait, but really lacking all of this range of motion of the running gait, right? And this is where I couldn't find good adhesion of the shoulder blade really finding my spine here. It wanted to wing a little bit and gape away from my ribs. I wanted it to be down and suction to my ribs the entire range of its trajectory in my gait. So I would sleep here and it was getting stuck. So that was doing damage to the tissue of the shoulder blade. It was also doing damage, I am confident, to my breathing and my ability to inhale and inflate right into this side of my rib cage. Because with my body weight on that side, all my breath as I'm sleeping for however many hours and over however many years is inflating only this side, and then obviously to other directions, but not to my left side, right? Because of the pressure of my body against it, no movement could happen there as meaningfully. And I have some backup for this theory because when I started doing more pronounced breath practice for the diaphragmatic activation, I would get low-grade cramping under some parts of my ribs and in this side of my body. I could just feel that I was moving and stretching tissue that was very happy to have the attention, but I could feel that it was fairly novel. And it even, literally it caused some cramping, not severe cramping that made me want to stop, but a sensation of stretch, right? It felt really beautiful actually, and I continue to do it, and I know it's really helping the other side of this coin, which is practicing the shoulder blade stabilization. So I'm going to be expanding on this in my classes coming up. We're going to be doing some shoulder physical therapy for learning how to engage your scapula if you can't already do it. But if you can, look up other videos, look at scapular range of motion, serratus activation. You will find these videos. You don't have to come to my classes to do it. But as I make content specific to this, I will follow up with some visuals. But in the meantime, if you're someone who knows how to feel your shoulder blades and knows how to squeeze them down, you can also activate your serratus, and you can feel that you are pulling the shoulder blade, not just positionally, but in. You can get more glue power. One of the things that made a big difference for me was actually protraction, posterior and anterior tilt of my shoulder blades, which is a lesser addressed movement, but I found that, a lot of us have shoulder blades that are kind of up high and anteriorly tilted forward. So for me, a big part of the solution was figuring out how to engage a meaningful posterior tilt of my shoulder blades to get that bottom corner nice and deeply adhered, really low in my on my back, on my thoracic spine. That was a big deal for me. I'm not saying it will be for you, but if you tend to ride kind of high and shoulders round like so many of us do, or you sleep on that side, which is going to put your shoulder there, might be interesting. So again, you guys know, it's not medical advice. I'm literally just sharing my own experience in case it resonates for you. So if this does, or if it doesn't, if you have comments, questions, feedback, please leave them in the chat. And so I don't think that's pretty much everything I want to tell you. Have a look at that 2-minute 40-something second video to see what led to this, and then I hope that this expansion on these topics has dropped leads in front of your eyes for what might help you transform your shoulder health for all the reasons you might want to, because your shoulders will feel better, because your spine could move better, because you can breathe more fully, for all the reasons. I had to stop there. For all the reasons. And so you can walk and run with more force. Force, injury prevention, optimization, to enjoy the human body.